I finally come across another one I like. A person, a poem, like driving a distance in weather that's been accurately forecast as ambivalent. Then there's a one gas station town, Archangel in late afternoon sun. For a few minutes, I'm in the county seat of illumination, hard work, no bullshit. I have a few questions. How does this happen? How long is it going to last? Will the gas station accept plastic? How far are those mountains? No, no, I don't want to know. The attendant doesn't seem to like or dislike me. It's another day in and out of the sun. At the other edge of town, the Archangel, with a head shake, turns down our ride. Raising massive wings, lifts off. I want to ask, is it always Halloween in heaven? It is hard when you like someone more than they like you, but it's enough that a good ending is like a final sweep of a squeegee, a gas gauge dial swinging over to full. The mountains look so close, but really are far away. A poem by our guest tonight, Steve Burke, from his chapbook, After the Harvest. So, welcome. My name is Charles Carr, and welcome to Philly Loves Poetry, a collaboration between the Moonstone Arts Center of Philadelphia and PhillyCam. The focus of our program is to give our viewers and our listeners the experience of the rich culture of poetry in the city of Philadelphia and around Philadelphia. So tonight, as I indicated, we really do have a remarkable and a very beloved poet of the city, and that is Steve Burke. So I would say, welcome, Steve. It's finally great to have you on Philly Loves Poetry. Steve's poems have been published in numerous journals and magazines. He has two chapbooks, both published by Moonstone, After the Harvest and For Now. Steve has been a featured reader at a number of readings around town, the Painted Bride Art Center, Moore College of Art, the Free Libraries Monday Night series, Fergie's Pub, the Green Line Cafe, the Big Blue Marble Bookstore in Chestnut Hill, and the Philadelphia Poetry Festival. Steve worked for 25 years as a labor and delivery nurse. He lives in Mount Airy with his wife, Giselle. And so, welcome, Steve. Been very much looking forward to having you as a guest on our show. So I wanted to start off our discussion tonight and kind of focusing on that one little piece at the end of your biography that for 25 years you were a labor and delivery nurse at, I think you told me Pennsylvania Hospital, which I know very well. And the reason I asked that, I mean, that is a place that is such a fascinating place in a hospital. I mean, it's really, I think at the edge of life, at the beginning of life. And so, I've seen it in pieces of your poetry, but I wouldn't say, to define your work as this is the expression of a medical professional, although you see parts of it. And so I guess my question has always been, how does that kind of seep in, and what has that experience meant to your development as an artist and a poet?
Well, I know the impact has been that it was a very, very busy hospital. And I mean, I worked at a few different hospitals, but Pennsylvania Hospital was very busy. I mean, I think one of the impacts is that when I did get a chance to write, I appreciated more, even more, the chance to have some quiet time. I mean, deliveries, lots of people now. So, and labor and delivery, of course, place of physical stuff, and poetry being of the imagination, to generalize, is, I mean, seemingly 180 degrees removed from each other. But they both, in their own ways, labor and delivering and poetry are concentrations. I mean, labor and delivery was a concentration of, like I said, physical energy, and poetry is a concentration of language. And the other thing is, a poem by itself and each delivery is indescribable. The other part of it is, even as sometimes, I mean, to talk about when you're working with a woman, having worked with women in labor, and to talk about the physical exertion I had to put out. I mean, it pales. But it was every delivery, that first breath of a baby is just engenders a sense of wonder, that which is not a vast one. It happens every day. I mean, I didn't have a delivery every day, but it's in a way it's proof that, obvious, but that creation is ongoing. I mean, a lot of times when I think about poetry, I think about how its job is to freshen the language, or it does. It's freshen the language, and that it can, and it can also, poetry can also make you feel a sense of wonder, feel a sense of horror, which might be a form of wonder, of wondering what's going on. I'm not sure. When I was witnessing and attending and helping a woman in labor, and with pushing, to be specific, that is, there's something. It's like an erasure of the active and passive case. There's something easy for me to say from the outside, but it was like there's an energy running through that woman, that it's part of her, but it is a part of her. But that whole process of pushing and delivering, there's a lot that a labor woman doesn't necessarily have control over. I mean, contractions, but it's a wild kind of thing that has to be dealt with, and it was different people, different kinds, a whole range of different kind of things. Same with poetry. I'm not sure what else to say about it.
Yeah. Well, we do say, about people, birthing poems, the process of composing and creating a poem. And it can't, there's not the physical pain, surely. Maybe for some people there is, but there is the, that sometimes a long gestation period of pain to produce a poem. And I think, because people, where was that where was that poem born, Charles? And I say there are immaculate conceptions, really, that kind of just come
I
out of the air. But no, I can, as kind of a stretch, but I can see, just you being a witness to that and that reality. I mean, it does show up in your
there's
work, but it's not like a direct, as I said, hey, well, somebody
right,
would pick up your book and say, hey, this is a very interesting collection of poems about what it is to be a nurse in a
right,
delivery room.
right,
But
right.
you see the humanity, your humanity, and that comes through. And kind of rolling forward in what I wanted to discuss is and something that we both have a fascination with, and that is the poetry of Thomas Tranströmer, this famous Swedish Nobel Prize poet, who I've been and when I read a lot of his work, um, I've seen a lot of you in that. Not that not by say title, not by subject, but the way his poems capture a page, and he's not one that has real long poems. They're short and they're brisk and they have great images and great use of economy of language.
Yes.
And I see that also in your work. And we've discussed it in the past. Our fascination with him is, but I was wondering is the impact and your thoughts of his impact on you and how you go about kind of capturing the page, capturing and building a poem on that in that very brief page, which can be so powerful.
Well, yeah, he's one of the. I mean, he was such a touchstone for me when I first started reading him. Um, I think I was already drawn to economy of line, and by having read, well, let's say Gary Snyder, who writes some longer poems, but
Mm-hmm.
and reading the old Chinese and Japanese poetry, and just loving that that economy of language, and um, kind of I don't know why I'm saying this, how nouns become verbs, can become verbs in a way. I mean, um, and Transformer has that also. I mean, in a way, I mean, I'm just thinking of this now, but that same economy in, you know, you might want to say a Western style, Western civilization style of writing of his. Um, the other thing about it is it it and he addresses this in an interview, but about the spirituality of his poetry. Now, but when I thought about that, I thought about this. It's not even in a. It's more in a pagan sense or Christian sense, not in a Christian sense, in that he has a certain earthiness to them. Or there's, he's not a nature poet, although he goes out sailing and goes to islands by himself and things like that. But this mystery that that is kind of in everything, and he tries to approach that, and there's no capturing it for him or anybody else. but that the whole sense of approaching mystery and how things are not so certain, and an exploration uh, that that just floored me. I mean, when I knew I was going to be interviewed, I made a list of poets that were like touchstones, and his was right. You know, it's like 5 names, but no way he could be excluded from that. If I may,
Sure.
There's at least if I could get to discuss this whole thing about mystery, I have a poem called Espresso. He has a poem called Espresso. They have no relationship to each other, but the quote that opens up this poem is from him, and it says, "This world is the other world too." And that sent me spinning. I mean, I started to think, I've read it so many times, and this last time was the first time I thought, what does he mean? What does he mean? What are these 2 worlds? And there's the world of, reality, of what we sense. And I thought, but what's the other world? Is the world of, you could say, imagination or uncertainty or wondering, what we do as individuals. And we each kind of have carry around our own world of sensation, of exchange with the other world. So, that they're separate, but they're connected in some way. I sometimes there's a quote from Alan Watts that sounds like a bumper sticker almost, but it's stuck with me for years, which is the outside is the inside of everything else. Now, and then I jumped from that at one point years later, and I thought poetry is the membrane, or it exists in the membrane between the outer and the inner, and that's, in a way, reading him and other poets, but reading him, I think, led me to that. And if it's selfishly, I love that image.
Yeah. Well, to a certain extent, like you, he had, a day job. I mean, he was a psychologist.
Right.
And I believe he actually worked at a hospital for, with young men, maybe young women too. I'm not sure. But I remember specifically that. And I think being in that kind of field, I mean, I was never a clinician, but I worked with, young men that were clinically troubled, and you could see there was another world that they had to cope with inside. And I'm wondering what extent that, I'm sure it impacted his work, but like him, your work is very intimate. There's a real intimacy, and the other part of it is that as I read both of your books, you pose a lot of questions that you don't ask your poem to answer necessarily. I mean, even the poem that I read is that big question mark that appears. I always find that very fascinating, because I think that poetry should be posing some questions rather than just an exposition of answers or an exposition of what we see as reality. And so I find that fascinating, but that seems to be a part of your work. And I would just, wonder if you could just discuss that, your use of that questioning so much in your poems.
Well, more I've written and read, the more I realized it's, call it uncertainty, call it wonder, um, uh, not having answers to everything, but we can't help but question. I mean, I do. I do have something, a little phrase I thought of myself. Although I don't know, when I wrote it down, I said, "This might not be original." I mean, in one way, I think poetry says it all, but it's just a little bit at a time. So, um, uh, but to get back more specifically to your question, I mean, um, poetry is anti-orthodoxy. Um, uh, it's 180 degrees from what a lot of people call sacred texts. Now, I have no problem with people believing in sacred texts, but the implication in that to me is that in a way it's already been said. There's nothing more to say, more to write. It's there. We got to go by that. And poetry is just about, or you go. I think of the example, a creation story. Well, like I said, in labor and delivery, in writing, you find out that creation is ongoing, and that it's alive. Um, it's you said something earlier about I think deliveries like being out on the edge. Well, there's kind of a contradiction, a paradox in poetry, which is that it's a concentration of language that's just so hard to describe, but at the same time, it's out on the edge of language. It's you're making something up. You're using words in the most imaginative way you can. Um, uh, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know what that has to do with intimacy. And,
Well, I think the really successful poems that I read bring you in, and you do feel that sense of intimacy. And I'm not saying that everyone can accomplish that, but um, I think when you ask those questions in your poems, that is the point where there's that intimacy. Is that I don't have all the answers here. I don't even have the answers to this poem and necessarily, which really leads me to, and I think as poets, people ask us, "Oh, hey, Charles or Steve, where did you get that poem?" And so I would just like you to discuss, well, how do poems come to you? Um, uh, you know, I've heard you read poems that are really in response to, an existential crisis or a tragedy, like as I've said to you many times, a poem that you wrote about, what happened at Sandy Hook and the slaughter. I mean, I was really in confusion and denial and I, as a not as a poet, but just as a person, I just didn't know how to make sense of that. That's a bad way to say to make sense of it, but how to respond to it. But when you you read that poem, I think it's called The Slide. I mean, it's that was very powerful. It was really like a wake up. And so, I said, so I come back to you. Says, how do poems come to you?
Um, I mean, this is not trying to dodge anything, but of ways. Um, um, you a couple of interviews ago, you interviewed J.C. Todd, and she quoted what she said stuck with me. She quoted Sylvia Plath, which was, "A poem begins as a glimpse," and um, I thought that's spot on, but I don't know how to describe it to say where it goes from that glimpse. I mean, a poet has to be a good listener and an attender, and just try. There's no exercise. I want to say leave yourself open, but how do you leave yourself open? I can't. I can't. I can't get to that. I don't know myself how. A lot of times, sometimes when I look back at something, I'll say, "Oh yes, yes, I can see how this led to this," or maybe if I remember what I was thinking of at the time. But um, it's again, I mean, there's this blurry line between the active and the passive, and what you have control over, and what you just have to, what just happens, or what comes to you. Um, I am not a disciplined poet. I don't sit down and write every day. I mean, I'm kind of, I don't think I'm a lazy poet,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not. I'm not sitting and at the keyboard every day, or um, um, it's a lot of times things come to me when I'm not sitting. If I'm walking,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times, being by myself, walking by myself, and I mean, there's so many things. Reading other poets.
Yeah.
I mean, um, if I were to give advice to anybody who wants to write poetry, does write poetry, I mean, if you feel you're stuck, you're dry, um, read poetry, read
Mm-hmm.
others' poetry. If you're not stuck, read others' poetry.
Right.
And it can prime the pump, so to speak.
It's
Um,
interesting that you mention another poet, and I think you saw the interview that I had with Paul Muldoon.
oh yes,
And Paul Muldoon was asked that same question, and he says, "I don't know where they come from.
right, right.
It's like miraculous." And he sometimes it's almost like I
I
don't have
think
the
he said,
foggiest notion how that came. And the other thing he said, and he tells his students to write poetry, not knowing,
yes,
not something that you know about, but something that you don't know. I'm not saying that's a
right,
rule, but
right.
that's something that he obviously has always been something that's been in his poetry. But this, what he said about essentially, I don't, I just where did that come from? Where did
I,
that poem come from? He
I
can't tell you.
I like what he said in that interview also about you know he's over 50. I mean, he's old enough.
Right.
Um, but he talked about going back and looking at stuff he had written when he was younger, much younger.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and it comes to him, did I write that?
Yeah.
That isn't so bad, but to say, did I write that?
Yeah.
Um, that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful thing. It gives such richness to going on in writing. Um, um, but
So, yeah.
yes, people should go back and listen to that interview.
Yeah. Well, they can go on YouTube. It's there.
Right.
Philly Loves Poetry. It
I
was a great interview. But I mean, there's so many. I mean, I've been so, along with
yes,
you, I've been so,
yes.
I've been so lucky to have so many of these great poets that I've been able to interview and listen to their poems.
Wow.
So, I mean, we're really at that time in the broadcast where, it's great to talk about poetry and the background, but people really want to hear your poetry, Steve. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to sit here quietly and behave myself and listen to your wonderful poetry.
Well, at least sit there quietly, Charles. First of all, I just want to thank Moonstone and, of course, you, Charles, and the crew at Philly Cam for having this opportunity in this broadcast. I just want to start off by actually a couple of sentences from A.R. Ammons in a wonderful book he wrote, Set in Motion, which is essays and speeches that he gave. But, it's about poetry. He says, having once experienced the mystery, plenitude, contradiction, and composure of a work of art, we afterward have a built-in resistance to the slogans and propaganda of oversimplification that have often contributed to the destruction of human life. Poetry is a verbal means to a non-verbal source. Now, that's another thing I've read many times, and when I read it to think about including it in this, I said, for some reason, I jumped to, if poetry is not, I mean, I don't think poetry can necessarily heal anything, but but maybe it's a vaccine against what he was talking about: oversimplification, propaganda, whatever. So if there are any anti-vaxxers out there, this is not the place to be, because hopefully you're about to be vaccinated, or but the good thing is there's no line. You don't have to wait. Anyway, I'm going to start off with a seasonal poem for the time of year. This is called Beneath the Reading Lamp. The year ends, the skin thins, literally. Me, you, at least, headed for translucence. If you write upon me, use the lip-narrowed tip of a calligraphy brush, a pigment vivid as the filigree of blood vessels beneath a preemie's skin. Some fine lines, yes, but allow enough space for light to pour through, as if it is something into which, even in the darkest of places, we think we could be transformed. Aside from, well removed from obstetrics, from a distance, I've been interested in neurology for a very long time. I mean, ever since I started reading Oliver Sacks. This is a poem that uses that as a springboard. It's called Agincourt, which is the was the 15th century, early 15th century battle where Henry V and his small army defeated a much larger French army, mainly through the use of the longbow. 80% of the, according to what I read, 80% of the British Henry V's forces were bowmen. Let me see if there's anything else in here I need to. No, let's just go with this. And there's three quotes that open by Albert Goldbarth. The eye betrays us daily. And from a description of the battle, the air was darkened by an intolerable number of piercing arrows flying across the sky to pour upon the enemy like a cloud laden with rain. And the third is a lyric by John Prine. My head shouted down to my heart, you better look out below. And this is in 3 parts. Agincourt. V.A. Ramachandran, renowned behavioral neurologist, has placed a mirror in front of a patient who, after a year of having an accident-numbed arm in a sling, then amputated, decades since has felt unremitting cramping in his phantom limb, as though it were immobilized in an awkward position. Ramachandran arranges the mirror so that the intact arm appears as a continuation of the amputated one, instructs the young man to move his arms in sync as a conductor. When the young man does so, he calls out, "Oh my God," as for the first time since amputation, he's moved his phantom arm. In a month, the pain fades. In other cases, hands that had been balled into painful fists opened, and phantom limbs that had stiffened into agonizing contortions straightened. The brain has been fooled for now. It's akin to building a seawall, a levee. Can it hold? But let us settle for tossing confetti over these happy scenes in genuine celebration of what our neurologist hero calls the first successful amputation of a phantom limb. From the same article, plain fact, the brain lacks pain receptors, which gives us access to a history of skull opening, electrode pin wielding, brain mapping, other neuro heroes, grants us a modicum as if we were happy to discover within the rest some kind of safety zone. The rest, which we can refer to in this text as the danger zone. 2. The pins have gotten finer, the maps broader, but so far in this pain discussion, there has been no mention of the heart, which perhaps to even out the brain numbness is capable of being studied, tortured with pins of all sizes, sometimes from immeasurable distances, a credible voodoo. Riddled, fooled, painfully, we've all felt it. It arcs back to us across time and space. But what is a comfort to a fool? Often enough, it seems prudent to fill sandbags ahead of time, install yet another deadbolt, circle the wagons more tightly. Then, as the heart leaks like a colander, unfold the wad of paper to read the riddle's answer. A promise. 3. On the obstetrical intake form, a section to assess what is presumably non-phantom pain. Some options: sharp, dull, throbbing, aching, cramping. Oh, the categories. Can't we just call it pain and you take my word for it? Sure, yeah, I promise. We're waiting for the pain to increase, decrease, stay the same. Let's listen to this. Blues man Luther Allison. Walk me like you walk your dog. I'll understand. What mind can lickety split contain such contradictions? It hurts so good. What manner of creature can reopen the chest for target practice? The air was darkened. What creature indeed? Here, let me put a mirror in front of you. I am going to read a poem about labor and delivery. It's not about any specific. It's called Labor and Delivery. And, I mean, years ago, in the early days of TV, I know they used to have, sometimes at night, I think right before stations signed off the air, when they did sign off, there'd be a little sermonette, a little religious piece. But this is called Labor and Delivery Sermonette. 1. There's something here that never gets talked about. Not that it needs to, as if mentioning it might nudge it away like an eye mote that scoots when focused upon, as if mentioning it would be as useful as talking about air, the space between objects, that which is drawn in to is expelled from the lungs, we inhale and forget, don't think of, not that we need to, the multi-split into blood-netted lung sacs, where we are kept alive, where fluid and air kiss. 2. When we look up at a clear night sky, we ooh and ah, not at the black, but at the stars, connect to dot them into constellation creatures, patterns on the drapes. Yet one telescoped look and we see a great bellowing beyond the immediate, the thick tissue of space with its countless end-on capillaries of light. One radio dish listen and we hear a garbled message 3/4 of a light year away from somewhere within our own Milky Way. 3. There are many theories as to why labor begins. Hormone coup, uterine stretch, high tide of amniotic fluid, but no one really knows. We can only sit and wait parabolically, eavesdrop on the dialogue between uterine clench and fetal pulse, fine-tune our controls until the top of head appears like the approach of a soft red comet. Then words fail, become too heavy, are as useless as a canoe filled with stones. All we're left with is light, sun, moon, star, water, a glimmer funneled through the back of our blood-rich retinas. All we're left with is a colorless, odorless, tasteless vapor that numbs our vocal cords while awakening the rest of us. All we're left with is this. First the head, shoulder, then the second, and with one quick swoosh, the rest. 4. We do know in our guts, without instruments or machines, that this is the gravity center of innocence, where priorities are straightened, where abstractions are but inert gases, where for each newborn it's a kind of North Pole, nowhere to go but south. Thou shalt make it a little warmer. I'm just checking my time. Let me read a poem called The H. The last few years that I worked, I would take public transportation. I take a bus, 2 buses to work, um, and ended up writing mainly in those to and from work commutes. Riding a bus has appeared in a bunch of poems also. Um, and it's called the H because that's the initial bus that I got on. Another winter poem too. Head down in the cold, I can still tell when I'm passing neighbor Connie's from the cigarette butts in the street. The way we can tell where the sun reaches least from the lingering ice as at the bus stop. Last night I dreamt of a seizure disorder, 9, then at least not threatening, a prospect of healing, somehow in it clearly moving from character to vague dream character as if it were a party game. Musical chairs, past the orange, a seat gained, the aroma of an orange snugged beneath the chin. But this morning, anything but dreamlike demands attention. In the unsure footing, in the chill, but especially in the brightness of the 3/4 moon, all convexity, but at least a light at which we can stare. And suddenly I am glad I am on my way to work, am warmed by this. My exhalations a vow of silence visible, my head empty as a light bulb in a closed refrigerator. Or not empty, maybe just full of this, cold, dark, and an insistent hum. Johannes Kepler, 17th century astronomer, one clear night, while working with concave mirrors, feels moon warmth on the back of one hand. I involuntarily turned around to see whether someone was breathing on my hand. Think of it as this: Kepler waking in bed to find that he's tossed one hand near the mouth of a sleeping, unexpected lover, a lover once considered as distant as that moon. And think of this, that maybe we are irregularly contoured, cupped, and curved, so we can throw off, take as we do so much else, warmth. But all this speculation must cease as the H, a shoebox of light, rolls up to curb, its door opening without thought in welcome. I'm gonna read a poem called Raking the Leaves. In the last few years, from Philadelphia to where my parents lived, about 60 miles north of New York City, I was going back and forth because of they were declining. And so this is kind of about being on. Part of it takes place in Philadelphia. It is what I might say an open weave kind of poem. It's in don't anybody get alarmed. It's in 21 very brief parts, and for some reason I'm still not sure why I did it. I actually started with 21 to start off and counted back down to 1. It just seemed doing that seemed like some kind of returning. But anyway, Raking the Leaves. 2021. North of my city, headed north from Carr speakers, Roy Acuff's old rightness. Heard the highway, but I didn't hear nobody. 20. A mile, my father said, from home to firehouse. A mile. 19. In that town, Halloween decorations up for weeks before. I mean, can a person remain? along roadsides, despite their alertness, despite the most graceful of lives, dear in clumsy poses. 18. How long? A voice replies. You don't want to know. 17. Fever cure. Stick to the 2 lanes. Follow reservoir shorelines. Imagine while bagging the trash. Yo-yo foggy mountain breakdown. Replace the names of the saints with those of blues musicians. 16. In my city, on an operating room table, a young addict, frantic, hobgoblins working within her about to be born, already crying out for help. 15. Saint Jerome, 4th century. Although God can do all things, he cannot raise up a virgin after she has fallen. 14. How leaves fall, then from beneath smell of dampness like a tallying up of the year. Then they return. 13. I say, Jerome, either he can or he can't. 12. Amid steep hillsides at the narrow river bridge, paying for the car behind no longer allowed. In my hometown, no more burning of leaves. 11. Graveside, a rabbi says the last mitzvah for someone, to bury them well. A difficult deed done kindly. The Buddha says, every leaf a truth. Luther Allison sings, give me back my wig and honey, let your head go bald. 10. I am billboards who are am always despite grief by the depth of an open grave. The devil in the details, the devil just another angel gone rogue. 9. Eventually, someone predicting the end of the world will be right. About the hillside trees, fallen leaves, bright as heaven's linoleum. 8. In that OR, intubation, general anesthesia, speed of the essence. The next to the last mitzvah, to breathe for someone. 7. I say she raises herself up. I say autumn, a window of opportunity. I say light one leaf, then use that one to light the next as if chain smoking into eternity. 6. That breakdown. Lester flat guitar, Earl Scruggs banjo, the pickers, I say, praise them all. I say better, each leaf a poem. 5. Coco Miller, you can have my husband, but please don't mess with my man. 4. I say, Jerome, lay down your quill. Touch a woman, touch a man, fall together. I say, Acuff, chill, wander the great gray city of autumn. Imagine a cello within each trunk. I say, unsurprising sadness, still the same. 3. I say, the scripture of autumn, to acknowledge the falling. I say, a sadness we could not fill even if we stayed all day shoveling. 2. My father, home again, jiggity jog. Champion Jack Dupree, stick out your can. Here comes the garbage man. 1. Yes, someday it will all be gone. But for now, let's rake a mile straight, let's say, through the leaves, an aisle wide enough so, if need be, we might pass ourselves coming the other way.
Yeah.
I think I'll read one more short one. Well, let me see. I think I have enough time. I think
Yeah.
a one pager. Let's get back to the one page. This is called Smoldering. 1. Jesus, Charles Wright is a poet, Charles Wright writes, said, "Lift up the stone and you will find me. Break open a piece of wood, I'm there." At least, I say, Jesus could have added, "Find everybody else too." And maybe he did, or we're still thinking. One of his buds at his elbow, scratching most of it down. If this were the scripture, the only things would be a mite easier. What does make it a little easier? Hearing out on the sidewalk Anthony, the next door 3-year-old, telling his cautioning mother that the bees are talking to him. Don't know if they are good listeners, but do know, yes, this is gospel enough for me. The Bible is a good book, but not the only. Beginning, middle, end, my Trinity. Also know that often enough I've preached to myself and made little sense, learned to avoid the preachers, and have been better for it. The best book, the one that's always being written. 2. Other than Anthony, I watched my father take off his glasses, lens pinpoint the sunlight, on concrete ignite a single dry leaf, a whiff of smoke and awe. Bees have never talked to me, but continue to gesture like crazy. Many times I have gathered firewood and stone, built and fed many fires, then with my shadow rich behind me, watched, listened hard. 3. Though still a mystery, light a straightforward gesture. Earth spinning so half can cool down, a half world of dreams sensible as buckshot of the fantastic. Each night riddled anew. Once I split a log and the pith tumbled out a smooth, pale stick, just once. Just once a veil of rain came at me across a stubbled field, and alone I laughed the best kind of laugh. After a night of campfire lingering, burned smell in clothes, hair, throughout the day, I reassure others it's not me, but I lie.
Well, thank you, Steve, for everything, for the poetry, for the discussion, the conversation. It was. I'm glad we could actually finally do this, and I want to thank you to Ileana Panetta for
Yes.
Philly Cam really to make this a broadcast possible, as she has with so many other of our broadcasts. And thank you, Philly Cam.
Excuse me. I mean, they're kind of the labor and delivery of the poetry.
Absolutely. That's a good way to put it. I don't know if Ileana would put it that way, but
Well,
anyway,
yes.
to Philly Cam. Of course, when I close out the show, I want to remind people that this, I talked about Steve's books being published by Moonstone, and Moonstone has published a lot of other poets. Moonstone has done more than any organization in this area. I would say more than any other organization to create and sponsor the love of poetry. And so I say that to say, remember Moonstone, and go to their website and find a way that you can support, donate, to keep that, that alive. Larry does so much. And we celebrated his 80th birthday, and he isn't stopping. He's not slowing down. He does just an unbelievable job of pushing forward poetry in the city of Philadelphia. And so for that, I ask for your support. And I want to again thank you, Steve, as one of my favorite poets and a good friend of mine. And of course, always give our love and our best to Giselle and Mariah.
Will do. All right.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste.